I think if Leonardo had been alive now, he would have been very proud to have been an Oklahoman. As Jackson mentioned, I do art and archaeology and astrophysics, just the A's. I know nothing about the B's. No business, no banking, no botany. But Leonardo, of course, who was a master of everything, wanted to write 120 books. He had that much knowledge in his head. Unhappily, he didn't get around to doing any of them. He illustrated a book for his good friend, the mathematician Luca Pacioli, and we see the great mathematical genius that he was in that book. But it's the notes, his codices, where we see the remarkable depth of his knowledge, his passions, and he's been called the most relentlessly curious man in history. Education is obviously about bright people doing smart things. And we know about very bright people. You'll find them at educational institutions. In my long career, I've had a number of remarkably gifted children, students. One came to the university and studied physics, math, and computer science under me. And he graduated before he was 18. He graduated in 3 years. Whenever I saw him in my nuclear physics class putting his pen down, I knew he was getting bored, so I'd elevate the level of the math. He'd pick up his pen, and all the other students in class would put their pens down. So they were out of sync. At Oxford, I had an even brighter student who would sit intently right in the front of the room. He would take no notes. By the end of the class, he knew as much as I did about the subject. I had him at the house once in Oxford, and I had taught my son how to play chess. My son became very good. He could dispatch anyone, and once he started leaving me in the distance, I retired from the game. He was 7, but I had this young man, Chris Wheatley from Oxford, one of the theoretical physics students, come and play chess with him. And within an hour or so, Chris had defeated my son Michael 3 times, and Michael was shocked and horrified. And afterwards, I asked him, I said, "How did it happen?" And he said, well, he went through all 40 moves in all 3 games, and he said that's how he did it. But then, a few years ago, I told them Chris Wheatley was the champion of Oxford and the champion of England. I didn't want another Fischer. Remember Fischer, the great chess player? And Michael instead studied physics at Princeton, then he did an MD, PhD at Hopkins, and he's a physician. And I'm very happy to be the father of a physician. I can call him in the middle of the night. Well, but Chris Wheatley was a genius. He was an ordinary genius. I've known 21 Nobel Prize winners in physics. I work with several of them, and they're truly gifted and also very lucky. Smart people come from smart families. In smart parents' homes, there are more books, not just one very large Bible, but lots of books. There's actually a correlation between the number of books in a house, in a home, and how well students do in their SATs. George Will, I think, published these numbers once. There's a correlation. This doesn't mean they have to have read all these books, but there's the mindset of all these books. But once in a while, you get a truly transformative genius. They're very rare, 6 perhaps, in the history of our species. They define entire fields. You never have to ask who is the greatest writer, for example, not only in English, but in any language. Who is the greatest writer? Shakespeare. No one will argue with Shakespeare unless the Italians say Dante, but Shakespeare is even greater than Dante. We know very little about Shakespeare, the person, but we know his writings. And my 11-year-old granddaughter, I teach her sonnets, and she loves them. Not just high tech, but it's the Shakespeare sonnets that she loves. I was at a conference a long time ago, in fact, exactly 30 years ago, It was a high-powered conference with 400 scientists, physicists, physicians, chemists, etc. And there were 14 Nobel Prize winners among them, 18 as a matter of fact. Then in one topic, one specialized group, we were touching on a truly slippery topic. We were talking about the existence or the plausibility of extraterrestrial intelligence. How many of you believe there is extraterrestrial intelligence? There's terrestrial intelligence. Well, living only 50 miles from Washington, D.C., I've seen no evidence. So but this was our topic, the plausibility of extraterrestrial intelligence within the framework of rigorous science. In the room of 80, there were all 14 Nobel Prize winners were there. And we were really asked to go up and give our Nichols sense of the questions. And one question we had 30 years ago was how valid this seven-factor formula was. It's called the Drake seven-factor formula. Since, of course, we've sent the Hubble into orbit, we've actually detected something like 300 planets outside of our own solar system, and chances are in the next few years with new satellites we'll detect a lot more. In any event, just before me, this speaker said, these factors are so nebulous we could be off by a factor of 100 in any of the seven factors. He said, if any one of the factors is 0, by multiplying these you get 0. So that would make us alone in the universe. I went up to a microphone to speak about other planets and how you can detect other planets, and right in front of me was Israel's greatest scientist, Yuval Ne'eman. Right behind me were 2 Nobel Prize winners, including my advisor once at Princeton, and I decided to sit down. I had nothing consequential to say. I wanted to hear them. But Sir John Eccles, standing right behind me, was holding on to my jacket like this. And he said, Adelaide, we want to hear a youthful opinion. And 30 years ago, I was very much more opinionated and more youthful. And I couldn't sit down. And as I listened to Yuval Ne'eman, he said, in my country, he said, we have a story. A woman goes to her doctor and says, I'm truly worried about this. This is number 5, the 5th pregnancy. The doctor says, you have nothing to fear, you have excellent history, you have excellent health. She says, but this is number 5. He says, don't worry about it. This goes on and on. She gets frustrated and slams her fist on his desk and says, you keep missing the point. According to statistics, every 5th child born is born Chinese. Now, this is true. 21% of the world is Chinese, so this is the likely outcome. But, of course, it's misused statistics. I had forgotten what I got up to say. He gave me the microphone, and while people were laughing or hissing at him, I remembered sitting in a doctor's office in Oxford. In front of me was the Lancet, and I picked it up, the Lancet, the medical journal, and in it there was a story about the 5th child. Same prologue. So I said, a woman goes to her doctor, she's pregnant for the 5th time. But this time there are some extenuating circumstances. She's suffering from tuberculosis, and her husband has a social disease. And the first 4 children were born blind, stillborn, deaf and dumb, and the 4th one has tuberculosis. You have to advise. I asked that group of illustrious scientists, how many of you would say, have the child anyway? None? If you don't vote, that means, you're doing it on your electronic answers. And how many of you would say, this is at time to terminate, perhaps? If you don't vote, that means you don't care. Well, the people in there voted. About 80% of them said this was a dangerous delivery, maybe this should be terminated, except it was a true story, and the 5th child was Beethoven. Now, I worship Beethoven's music, and I felt guilty ever since I aborted Beethoven. Yuval Ne'eman came up to me, the Israeli, and he said, "Try this one," he said. This was in the break. He said, "A woman is pregnant for the first time, but tells the doctor she's married to a distant cousin, and she's in her mid-40s. The husband is in his mid-60s. So should she have the child?" And on that I voted no. And how many of you would vote no? You're not voting. Or are you voting? This was Adolf Hitler. But these are still anecdotes, and you have to be very careful about using anecdotes and statistics. Finally, there's a story of a 15-year-old girl who becomes pregnant with her boyfriend who's 24. He's well-to-do, but she's impoverished. And there's no question in this case. I won't ask you. The child is born, a love child. The year is 1452, May the 15th. Leonardo da Vinci was a love child, the son of a notary, and if he had been born legitimate, he probably would have gone into the family business. He would have been a notary. He would have been a very good notary, no doubt, but just like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, he would have been a notary. The first 5 years of his life, he lived with his mother. The father married another woman of his own social station. Then, when the boy was 5, the father came and took him, and the boy lived with his father's family in the next 10 years. And when he was about 15, they moved to Florence. They had been living in Vinci and with the mother in Anciano. There he was apprenticed to Verrocchio, which a word that literally means the true eye, and it was a perfect fit. Verrocchio always told his pupils, his apprentices, learn from nature, number one, not from each other, something that Leonardo echoed throughout his life after that, learn from nature. And the other thing he said was, learn the body from the inside out. Build the muscles, and the muscles should be overlain with clothes so that it actually looks realistic. Things that weren't going on in earlier generations. But Verrocchio had no idea what levels Leonardo would go to learn the body. I'm going to show some slides. This can go on. Oh, that's the new book, Leonardos Universe. The National Geographic just released it. I'm really excited because it marries the great photography of the National Geographic and the greatest art of our species. The Britannica blog writer immediately declared it one of 10 must-have books for the year. And since the economy is very poor, I hope you will go out and buy it, and I'll sign it afterwards. But I will go to the slides now. Otherwise, we will... where's the red card holder and the yellow card holder? Okay. At 9:40, if you'll signal me, I'll go to the slides. In the beginning, I'm going to do some drawing. Thank you. And we can turn the lights way down, please. Thank you very much. When I was a student at St. Andrews is where the Dead Poets Society was filmed, the father of a student gave a talk on the divine proportion or dynamic symmetry. He was a mathematician. He was actually an engineer doing art. He wasn't a very good artist. He would flash his pictures up in slides, but that lecture was the most important lecture I ever heard because I had a passion for mathematics, and I had a passion for drawing, for art. So, and during my career in physics, I would always paint or sketch, but mindful of the mathematical basis of art, the symmetries, the perspective, and so forth. The sort of thing that the artists of the Renaissance were cognizant of. So I proposed a book to Oxford University Press and then to the Smithsonian, a The book was going to be called The Two Leonardos. It was a double entendre because it really did have two meanings. It could be the two different Leonardos, Leonardo Fibonacci de Pisa, a medieval mathematician, de Pisa, and of course the other one was Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo Fibonacci had lived in the 12th century from roughly 1160 to about 1240. He was educated in northern Africa, where mathematicians were far ahead of their European counterparts, the Arab scholars. He came back to Pisa. Whenever you see a word with an L in front, like algebra, algorithm, alchemy, these are Arabic words. Alchemy, there's an H here. AL means the. Alimony is not. Alimony is not an Arabic word. That comes from Southern California. Well, Fibonacci came back to Pisa, and in 1202, he wrote a monumental book called the Liber Abaci, the Book of the Abacus. It sounds like the name of a famous pianist, the Liber Abaci. In the book, he introduced the decimal system, the system that was being used before. He opened his book with the question, what is this number? Can anyone read it? XCV111. 98 is right. And then he also said, try this. L is 50. That's also 98. So it shows the ambiguity of the system. You can write the same number in different forms. So he proposed a new system based partly on the Arabic and partly on the Hindu, 1 dash for 1, 2 horizontal lines tenuously, lightly connected for 2, 3 horizontal lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see how it goes. Our system of notation of numbers is based on these number of dashes in a symbol. The 7 takes some imagination, but the 7 that he proposed was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 8, he 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 9 he borrowed from the Arabs, and the 0 he borrowed from the Hindus. In fact, it was the Hindus who introduced it in the first place. The Arabs don't make their numbers like this. They make their numbers more like this. 3, 4 is a backwards 3, 5 is a circle, etc. 6 is really confusing. That's 6. 7, 8, 9, and that's their 0. But it was the 13th chapter that was the most interesting in his book. In the 13th chapter, Fibonacci introduced a problem of rabbits. Imagine in a very large enclosure like this, you have one pair of rabbits, and they're going to reproduce. One vertical dash means a pair, 2 rabbits. But the rules of the game are they have to mature for 2 months before they can give rise to new offspring. They never die. There's no immigration. There's no emigration. They simply reproduce. Nobody dies. They just keep multiplying. So in the first month, January, there's 1 pair of rabbits. In February, we'll give them an ear to indicate they're 1 month mature. In March, they gain a second ear and reproduce. In the 4th month, April, they come down and reproduce because they're already mature, and this pair gains an ear. In May, the 5th month, they come down, reproduce. This pair gains an ear. This pair gains a second ear and reproduces. Then in June, the original pair, 1 new pair. This pair comes down and gains an ear, reproduces. This pair comes down, reproduces, and this one gains an ear. You see how it works? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I missed one. This one came down, multiplied. This one came down. It should have gained an ear. This one gained a second ear and reproduced, and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, his question became, at the end of the year, in the 12th month, how many rabbits would there be? And he hit upon the answer very easily. He saw the pattern, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. What's the next? 13. Next? 21, 34. Keep adding them. 233, 377, 610, 987, 1597, etc. The algorithm, the AL word, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5. What Fibonacci didn't realize, we found out only in the last century, was that these are nature's numbers, numbers that nature truly likes. What he did next was, or rather what we've done next, is connect them to nature. If we take a sunflower, here are the petals of the sunflower. The seeds go this way, clockwise. And then, if you are careful and you count them counterclockwise, you'll see that there are counterclockwise seeds as well. You'll find that it's 55 in one direction, 34 in the other. In another species of sunflower, it'll be 89 in one direction, 55 in the other. See, these are all sequential pairs of Fibonacci numbers. Here's the rest of the sunflower. If this had been a chrysanthemum, it would have been 34 and 21. If it's a pine cone, it's 8 and 13, always Fibonacci numbers. If I paint or draw a tree, I start from the bottom. I go like this. Here are the roots. This branch branches like this again, but this one keeps going. After a while, this one will branch, and at the same height, one of these two will branch, but then this will not. Incidentally, I'm right-handed, and when I shade, I go like this. I can control my shading by putting the heel of my hand down and just making horizontal swipes like this. A left-hander like Leonardo would always do it this way. This is negative slope. This is positive slope. As a matter of fact, I bought a pair of ties in. I have a tie suitcase here. And the two ties I brought in, I'm not sure these will show up too well. Maybe like this. You see it? See them? They're in opposite directions. This is an American tie. All American striped ties are negative slope. All European striped ties have positive slope. So this would be the left-hander's slope. That's another reason I think Leonardo would have preferred the United States over Europe. But everybody claims Leonardo, and certainly tie makers should claim him in the United States. In this tree, if the light is coming from here, the left side is darker. You can see the bark much deeper here. But what does this have to do with Leonardo? Or what does it have to do with Fibonacci? Anyone figure it out? If you count the number of branches at any level, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No self-respecting artist really goes around counting branches. Leonardo would. He was compelled, he was looking for patterns always, and in his notebooks you see these. You see how he's constantly observing, recording. In fact, he was the obsessive-compulsive recorder of everything. He left something like 20,000 pages of notes. Unfortunately, only 4,000 to 5,000 have survived. Any one of them is worth over $1 million nowadays. They're spectacular. They're spectacular in that the layout is perfect, the drawings are the best ever created. All the notes are written from right to left. He wrote backwards in mirror script. To read his notes, you have to put a mirror next to them. Or if you have a computer, you can flip them over in Photoshop. But everything is backwards. Art historians have sometimes said he was being secretive. Not at all. He was doing this for himself. He could write much faster because if you're left-handed and you write from left to right, first you'll smudge the ink, and secondly, the point of the quill will get stuck in the paper. It's much easier to pull to the left, just as how many left-handers are there in the audience? Very good. How about left-handed Italians? They're the ones I'm most jealous of. I expect you to raise your hand, Peter. Mr. Da Vinci, sorry. So he always wrote backwards from right to left like this, the way Arabs do, for example. And in the old days, the Ottoman Turks used to write that way. One last thing, and I will get to the slides. If I divide these numbers in pairs, 1 divided by 1 is 1, 2 divided by 1 is 2, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, 5 divided by 3 is 1.666, 8 divided by 5 is 1.60, ad infinitum, 1.625, 1.615, 1619. And as you keep going, they'll finally settle on 1.618034. But it's an irrational number, so it'll keep going forever, an infinite number of terms. By the time we got down to here, these two numbers, and we divided 2584 by 1597, we would have gotten that 1.618034. It's called the golden ratio. The Greeks, who didn't have this series, also discovered 2,500 years ago the same ratio using this geometric construction. They made a square. The Pythagoreans, Mr. Pythagoras was trained in Miletus in southwest Turkey. He went to Italy after he got some postgraduate education in Alexandria. He went to Italy, and set up a studio, Crotone, in Italy. There, they would take a square, they would bisect it, they would take a compass, plant the needle or the nail of the compass here and the pencil here. They would make an arc like this. They would extend the horizontal line, drop a vertical, and complete a rectangle. Now, it's easy enough to calculate the sides of this rectangle. Of course, the square was 1 by 1, so this is 0.5, this is 0.5, this is 1. Using the Pythagorean theorem, you can find out what this length is. It's the square root of 1.25, which happens to be 1.11834. So that's what this distance is. You add it to this distance, and you get 1.618034. See? So it's exactly the same ratio, and the Greeks had discovered it using geometry. In their architecture, they used it in the most famous building in the world as a extrovert building. It's usually called the most beautiful building in the world. Here, let me do this fresh. Here's the square. You extend it by 62%. Here's the golden rectangle. 3x5 cards are golden rectangles. I have some here. 3x5 is a pair of Fibonacci numbers. So they come very close to that. Even closer, here's another golden rectangle. And don't think the manufacturers of these haven't realized. Here's a golden rectangle. They're made to appeal to us. And in this case, it appeals more to my wife than it does to me. But here, I set up the golden rectangle according to the prescribed rules, and then I draw the diagonal, the roof line, 3 steps at the bottom, 8 fluted columns. These columns look like this. They're fatter in the middle than they are at the top. The cross-section would look like this. They're fluted this way. You see? And you remove these edges. The designer was Phidias, written in Greek. His name gives us the golden ratio, so this is phi. Phi or phi for Phidias. He and his assistants, Callicrates and Ictinus, built this remarkable building. Then Phidias, the greatest sculptor of his time, also came and embellished the pediment like this. He carved these marbles for the British Museum. The Greeks and then the Romans always used this iconic number, 1.618, to shape their buildings, and even the statues. The Romans especially would measure the height of the person and the height of the belly button, and the ratio had to be 1.618. It turns out to be slightly wrong. It's 1.64. In the Vitruvian Man, Leonardo's drawing, I measured it with a vernier caliper very precisely. He had it exactly right. I know with my students once in a lab, I had them doing some statistics. We were trying to calculate standard deviations, averages, uncertainties and things. They measured, I think there were 20 students in the room, 10 males and 10 females. We first did the males on one side and the females on the other side to see whether they differed at all in the ratio, and then we factored them all in, and the ratio came out to be 1.64, closer to Leonardo's Vitruvian Man than the golden ratio. In any event, the system was lost until the Renaissance, when it was reinvented. Thank you. Imagine you have a square, you've extended it downwards by 62%. You draw the diagonals of the square and the rectangle. That's where the head goes. That's the sweet spot on the canvas, on the board. If you're really good, then you can turn the head slightly this way and the body slightly this way in a contrapuntal pose, so that the planes of the face and the plane of the body are slightly different. Gives it a dynamism, just like an aerial screw, like this, like a corkscrew. On the face, Betty Edwards wrote a wonderful book some years ago, 1978, I think, where she showed it was you divide the face into 5 equal increments. The eyes go on the equator like this. Then the eyes are placed here and here. Then the width of the mouth is the width between the pupils. Like this. Very hard to draw with magic markers, but you get the idea. Then you draw the hair. And if you're Leonardo, you leave notes about how this ratio, the length of the forehead to the length of the nose is 1 to 0.618. Then the length of the nose to the length of the upper lip is 1 part to 0.618 again. It keeps repeating. This is all found in Leonardo's notes. Now I will go to the slides. Do I need to turn off the lights on the Elmo? I guess not. The cover of Leonardo's Universe. This came out 5 years ago. In fact, right after it came out, I came to Oklahoma City, and I came to the University of Central Oklahoma, and I think it was a record. I think I signed 186 books that day. That was a record. But the designer of this cover, I had called the book The Two Leonardos because of that double entendre. Halfway through the book, the publisher had invited me in and said, this is 95% Da Vinci and only 5% Fibonacci. Maybe you should have another name with a possessive in it. Galileo's Daughter had just been published. It was a wonderful book. And they said, a possessive. I said, how about Leonardo's model? That's a double entendre because there's the modus operandi of Leonardo, how he integrated everything, his passions for mathematics, for art, for physics, for geology, and there was also the woman who sat for the most famous painting in the world. They said, great, we'll make it Leonardo's model. A good friend, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, said, I'll even write a blurb for it. I like that title so much. The blurb is the paragraph that goes on the back of the book. So we thought we were going with Leonardo's model. When the book was finally finished, 13 chapters, they called me in again to Washington, to the Smithsonian Books office, and they said, we don't think it's going to sell with that title. I said, what will it sell with? And they said, what do you think of Math and the Mona Lisa? I hemmed and hawed because all through the book I had talked about Leonardo's model, but then I said, I guess it would work because there's nice alliteration there. Also, it gives us license to put the Mona Lisa on the cover. The editor smiled from ear to ear and pulled out the cover. It had already been printed. They know best because this is how it's multiplied, just like Fibonacci's rabbits. There are only 2 pictures that don't belong in there. Can you see the ones that don't belong? There's an intelligence test. This doesn't belong? You're right. This doesn't belong because it's a repeat of this one. This belongs. That's the Polish cover. And that's different. All these are different. There's an early laptop. Now, I'm so happy that Apple, our corporation, is one of the sponsors of this. I'm an Apple user, a Macintosh user, as is my son, as is my daughter. It's almost a choice of religions. How many Apple users, Mac users are there? Wow, that's fabulous. Well, when I started getting royalties for my first book, The Math and the Mona Lisa, I immediately ordered a 17-inch G4. It's right here. And a friend of mine sent me an essay by Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco, the great Italian writer, who said, Macs are the Catholics of the computer world and the PCs are the Protestants. They can interpret things any way they want. So I knew one of my good friends, another Nobel Prize winner, was a Mac user. I sent him Umberto Eco's essay, and he wrote back right away. He said, when the girls went away to college, we admonished them, date within the religion. Stay away from PC people. This is a later model in a village in Turkey. That's how the Parthenon would have looked if all the lines were straight. If you take a tight string and pull it across, since the horizon line is convex like this, a straight line held in front of it will look like it's sagging. We would think of the earth as being flat, and then the string would look like it's sagging. That's how it would have looked. It's exaggerated in this case, but here, this is how Phidias shaped the bottom. It's a convex curvature, not as convex as this. If you look at it straight on, it looks perfectly straight. If you come to the side and look at it, you can see the hump in the middle. That's how you calculate the radius of curvature. Then the columns are aimed to meet in the sky at 1.5 miles up. The radius of curvature is 3.5 miles. And there are the famous Elgin marbles. This is what the Parthenon looks like now. A long time ago, I was visiting the Parthenon with a friend of mine, a dean from Virginia. I think probably Susan McAlmont would remember, Dean Croucher. At one point, as we were leaving the Parthenon, he bent over to tie his shoelaces. When he stood up, he was ashen white. I said, "Oh my God," I said, "are you ill?" And he said, "No, I stole a piece of the Parthenon. And if they catch me, I'm going to wind up in a junta prison." Well, as we walked off the Acropolis, we saw a truck approach and dump tons of stones for the next day. This is Florence in the time of Leonardo, and David becomes the symbol for Florence. Florence always saw itself as the small city-state, constantly being harassed by stronger neighbors, by Pisa, by Milan, by Siena. And every time it came out on top, it survived. It always said it won. It survived. They would commission another David statue. It was David and Goliath. They were the little kid on the block. Donatello made that incredible bronze. It's about 5 feet high. It's in the Bargello in Florence. Leonardo's master, Verrocchio, who was a better sculptor than he was a painter, made this one. And that's the one I like the best. Although the contest was put to rest another 40 years later when Michelangelo made a David, 13.5 feet tall, incredible. I mean, it is the most famous of all Davids of all statuary in the world. But it's the middle Verrocchio that I'm interested in most. I had permission to take photographs in the museum. I gave them a card with my that National Geographic makes, bookmark business card that has the cover of the book on it, and they let me take photographs. The statue is on a pedestal 5 feet high, and then the statue rises 5 feet. I put my camera on top of my tripod, and I held it at arm's length like this so I could get the shot. Now look at this close-up of the statue. Leonardo in his old age, by his assistant Melzi. It's the same person. That's Leonardo, the transformative genius, as a teenager. Verrocchio painted this painting in the Uffizi when you go from the Botticelli room, those famous Botticelli paintings like the Birth of Venus. You go into the Leonardo room where there are 3 paintings. Leonardo, this incredible artist, did only 12 paintings. Never mind that the number 1 and number 2 are by him. Well, he was working as an apprentice for Verrocchio as a teenager. Verrocchio did the painting of the Christ and John the Baptist. Then he asked his 2 assistants, most likely Botticelli, right here, looking up adoringly at this angel done by Leonardo, the apprentice. When Verrocchio saw Leonardo's angel, he never painted again. It was a genius meeting a transformative genius. It rarely happens, but it happens. 200 years later, when Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist in history, had gone home for 18 months because of the plague sweeping through England, he came back to Cambridge in 1666 with virtually all of physics. He had discovered the universal law of gravitation, the 3 laws of motion. He had formulated calculus. Incredible. His professor, the gifted mathematician Isaac Barrow immediately retired and became a preacher. And Newton became the Lucasian professor. Again, a genius meeting a transformative genius. At 19, Leonardo put this gilded ball, 8 feet in diameter, on top of Brunelleschi's dome. It was a task that Verrocchio's studio had undertaken, and Leonardo was in charge of putting the ball there using the same hoists that Brunelleschi had used. But this is important because he became absolutely infected with the need to do engineering tasks and gadgeteering after that. For 17 years, he moved to Milan, and for 17 years, he worked as a military engineer. There are all these conflicting and contradictory characteristics. He's a pacifist working as a military engineer, just as Einstein was a pacifist whose work really explains the atom bomb. He wrote this letter to Duke Sforza, and in the letter he starts out with, Your illustrious Lord, I would like to come and work. There are 10 items enumerated there. He says, I can build castles that no cannonball can ever pierce. I can build walls that no cannonball can pierce. And cannonballs that can pierce any wall. He comes down and talks about shielded, armored vehicles, tanks. Then at the bottom he says, I also paint. He loved contradictions. Here he's using the golden rectangle to get the best proportions of the face. And the left-handed shading you see clearly here. The design of the side wheeler. There's a replication of the side wheeler. An exploded view of machine parts. The automatic transmission. This is 1490. And there's an odometer. It looks very much like a wheelbarrow. You wheel it around the city walls. Every time this wheel turns 30 times, this wheel turns once. Every time this one turns 30 times, this turns once, and a ball falls into the box. So 27,000 turns of this wheel essentially gets one ball. It's got to be a large area that he's measuring. It's a simple gadget. But this probably was replicated, whereas many of the others were mental inventions. Here is, for 100 years, we thought this was the design of a spring-powered cart. It turns out to be robotics. He invented robotics 500 years ago. That's a robotic knight. I saw this in Istanbul, where it had been replicated. It was on exhibition. The knight would stand up, open its chest, and pull out a bouquet of flowers to give to Mrs. Sforza, the Duchess. More than anything else, he wanted to know how to fly. He illustrated reams and reams of notes with the dynamic motion, the serial motion of wings, exactly how they move. You need preternatural vision to do this. Preternatural vision, the only person I've heard of who has had it in the past century, was Ted Williams. Ted Williams used to claim that he could see the writings and the seams on a baseball coming to him at 90 miles an hour. That's what you have to draw the wings of birds like this. Well, you can imagine that when he built these ornithopter wings and told his assistants they were going to test fly that day, you can imagine the reaction. Clearly, these wouldn't have worked. He couldn't have gotten enough power, even with a canvas stretched over them. Then he decided to try the aerial screw with a couple of people powering the screw. In the 20th century, Sikorsky invented the helicopter inspired by Leonardo's drawing. And if it didn't work, he had a parachute. The notes are from right to left with the specifications, what size the canvas has to be for a person to land safely. The evolution of the bicycle in the 19th century from 1818 to 1900. a unicycle balanced with a small wheel in the back, with a small wheel in the front. But it took roughly a century for the modern bicycle to evolve. This is an expensive Mercedes-Benz bicycle. This is Leonardo's drawings. There's the left-handed shading again. There's a chain, sprockets and gears, and a bicycle. It's a little scary. One of my students sent this to me once. The caption reads, "I saved some money on the footings, but don't worry, no one will ever notice." Well, two people who noticed were Leonardo and Galileo. Both did experiments with falling bodies, not actually at the Tower of Pisa, but they both came up with answers. In Leonardo's case, it's an arithmetic series, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units of distance in equal increments of time. Galileo came up with the odd integers, 1, 3, 5, 7. Both of these are arithmetic series. Both of them, when you sum them up, give you a quadratic equation. Both of them give you constant acceleration. So Galileo, who gets credit for the law of free fall, published his result. Leonardo, unhappily, didn't publish. This is the tragedy of Leonardo. If he had published all his notes, chances are we would have been at this level of technology in the late 18th century. He was doing what Galileo was doing and what Newton was doing. He didn't know the mathematics of Newton, but certainly the intuitive understanding was there. And again, preternatural vision, he could see that trajectories were parabolas. In the hands of Isaac Newton, they became elliptical trajectories or orbits. There's Isaac Newton, another one of the half a dozen or so transformative geniuses. We had an exhibition of Leonardo's inventions, all replicas, of course. None of them have survived. In Virginia in 2002, I selected this drawing. It was a replica facsimile from the National Gallery, and we had Galileo's telescope, Isaac Newton's reflector around 1680, and the Hubble telescope. This drawing that was on the cover of Math and the Mona Lisa, the designer of the book had selected, it's the reflecting telescope. I had 2 Nobel Prize winners in physics at the exhibition that day, at the opening, and I pulled them aside. I said, "Come and see this drawing. What do you think?" And they gasped when they saw it, the reflecting telescope. Whether he actually made it, whether he had time for it, nobody knows. But he knew the design. In the sciences, he was best at anatomical studies. And here, he gives the left-handed shading again, the beautiful layout, all the notes from right to left. It was a crime punishable by death to do these autopsies. He must have been paying off people, morgue operators, in order to do this in those fetid chambers, hot, humid. But this one, we think is the elderly man that Leonardo refers to when he says in his notes, "I visited an old man in the hospital, and I asked him how old he was. And the man said, 'I don't know, but I'm very old.' Leonardo said, 'What is very old?' The man says, 'Well, I don't know, but my grandson is 58. So Leonardo estimates that the man is over 100. Suddenly, with a smile on his face, the man dies. Leonardo, this relentlessly curious man, does an anatomy of him. He says, "I wanted to know how anyone could die such a sweet death, so I immediately did an anatomy." A few weeks later, he does the anatomy on a child, and he writes in his notes, the difference was that the old man, the vessels leading to his heart were clogged and the vessels were brittle. In the case of the child, they were clear and supple. He's describing atherosclerosis discovered 400 years later at the University of Vienna's medical school. The heart These are drawings by Leonardo, and that's a CAT scan that my son took. It's actually in a movie form. I could rotate it on my computer screen on my nice Mac, and then when I got it just at the right configuration, I stopped it to capture that picture. I don't know who the patient is, but I know I was a sample in my son's study once, so it could be me even. This is the way he would have written. Difficult to read. If he knew English, he would have written this way. But if you reverse it, that's what he's saying. Nature being inconstant and taking pleasure in creating. He's talking about evolution. 350 years before Darwin, he talks about evolution. There's the story of this Turkish connection. I think I have 5 minutes. That he was invited to Turkey to do some paintings and some engineering, but this would have been in 1480. He had just taken a job in Milan, where he did the Last Supper, so he didn't go then. But 20 years later, he was out of a job when the French invaded Milan, and he was out of a job. He took his mathematician friend Luca Pacioli and his two assistants, Salai and Melzi, and he writes a letter to the Turkish emperor, the Sultan. He says, "Your illustrious lord, I can build castles, I can build cannons, I can build a bridge for you. I also paint." This is the bridge he designed. He wasn't hired. This is the bridge he designed. It was finally built 500 years later in Norway. This is Leonardo's bridge. It's a marvel of function and form. We don't have time for these pictures, but I'll tell you that the central line principle was discovered in 1998 in all great portraits by Leonardo, Rembrandt, Picasso. The line that divides the painting right down the middle goes through one eye. It's never taught in art schools. Even Picasso's Dora Maar. Picasso didn't know the rule, so he did it intuitively. If he knew the rule, he would have put the eye down here. There's the old rabbi by Rembrandt. It has more life than the poor Russian tourists in front. There's a self-portrait. It's my son when he got his medical degree. Right down the... See if your photographs aren't like that. It has to be single-subject photographs. Not here. Jamie Wyeth painted a painting of a portrait of John F. Kay. The ratio, however, is 1 to 0.618. I better stop here. Leonardo's fingerprints. We wanted to bring this painting to the United States for exhibition in 1992, when it was the 500th anniversary of Columbus's discovery. The Poles were not about to let us borrow the painting, but fortunately Lech Walesa was visiting the United States, and George Herbert Bush, the father, asked if we could borrow the painting. He said, sure, why not? So the painting came to the United States, and one of the things discovered, just as in the case of the Ginevra, the fingerprints of Leonardo. Leonardo was practicing a technique called velatura. He would put raw paint on the panel, then with his fingers he would mix them. So he had to leave the fingerprints, and there they are. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you very much.